In the battlefield of life, we all face the same question as Arjuna. Should we act, or should we renounce? Should we fight the world, or escape from it? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna first reveals in chapter 3 that desire and anger are the true enemies, hiding within us. Later, in chapter 5, he shows that renunciation and action are not separate. Both lead to freedom when done without attachment. Together, these chapters give us the master key to conquer desire, perform duty, and walk the path of liberation. Chapter 5, Karma Vairagya, Yoga, the Yoga of Renunciation of Action. Here, Krishna answers Arjuna's doubt about whether renunciation of action or selfless action is superior. Arjuna opens this chapter with a direct question. Krishna, you praise both renunciation of action and selfless action. Which of these two is truly better? Krishna replies with compassion. In verse 2, he says, both renunciation and selfless action lead to liberation. But of the two, selfless action, karma, yoga, is superior. Here lies a deep truth. Action cannot be avoided. Even renunciation is an action in itself. Psychology shows that complete withdrawal from duty often creates restlessness, while purposeful action provides meaning. Neuroscience confirms that active engagement keeps the brain alive, while isolation often leads to decline. Logic too agrees. A moving river remains pure, while stagnant water decays. In verse 3, Krishna describes the true renunciate, he who neither hates nor desires, who is free from dualities, is easily released from bondage. Renunciation, then, is not about abandoning the world, but abandoning attachment. Psychology echoes this. Freedom comes not from running away, but from inner balance. Neuroscience shows that emotional regulation calms the brain, reducing the grip of fear and craving. Logic affirms, when the scales are balanced, no weight can disturb them. In verse 4-5, Krishna unites both paths. The ignorant think that Sankhya, the path of knowledge, and Karma Yoga are different. But the wise know they lead to the same goal. He who sees both as one truly sees. This is harmony. Knowledge purifies the mind, while action purifies the world. Together, they bring liberation. Psychology suggests that both inner clarity and outer responsibility are needed for wholeness. Neuroscience explains that thought and action are two sides of the same neural process, one incomplete without the other. Logic agrees. The bird needs both wings to fly. In verse 6, Krishna warns, renunciation without yoga is difficult to attain, but the sage who engages in karma yoga, purified in mind, quickly reaches Brahman. This shows that action with detachment is the easier and more natural path. Psychology supports this. Those who engage in meaningful work find growth more accessible than those who try to abandon life's duties. Neuroscience highlights the brain's reward system. Purposeful activity creates lasting satisfaction, while idleness breeds anxiety. Logic says, the farmer who tends his field grows food, while the one who abandons it finds only weeds. Krishna now explains the qualities of the true yogi, who follows the path of selfless action. In verse 7, he declares, the yogi, devoted to selfless action, pure in mind, mastered in self, free from attachment, and equal to all beings. Even while acting, he is not bound. This is a portrait of freedom within action. Psychology confirms that purpose-driven individuals experience less stress because they act without inner conflict. Neuroscience shows that when the brain is aligned with clarity of purpose, neural circuits of focus are strengthened and distractions weaken. Logic makes it clear, the hand that holds firmly to the root cannot be shaken by the wind. In verse 8-9, Krishna says, the wise, knowing the truth, think I do nothing at all, while seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, speaking, releasing, holding, opening, closing the eyes. They know only the senses are engaged with their objects. This is detachment in action. The body performs, but the self remains untouched. Psychology calls this mindfulness. Awareness that we are not our fleeting actions or impulses. Neuroscience supports this. Observing thoughts without identifying with them quiets the amygdala and calms emotional storms. Logic illustrates. The sky remains unchanged, even as clouds move across it. In verse 10, Krishna assures one who performs actions, offering them to the divine, abandoning attachment, is not tainted by sin, just as a lotus leaf remains untouched by water. Here lies the beauty of karma yoga. The act is done, but the heart stays pure. Psychology teaches that service-oriented action prevents ego inflation. Neuroscience notes that gratitude and surrender activate positive reward pathways in the brain, reducing stress. Logic explains, fire cannot burn the stone that stands apart. In verse 11, Krishna adds, yogis abandoning attachment, perform action with the body, mind, intellect, and senses, only for self-purification. Action is not for gain, but for growth. Psychology highlights that habits of discipline reshaped character. Neuroscience shows that repeated practice rewires the brain, creating resilience and balance. Logic concludes, the sculptor shapes the stone, and in the process, the stone shapes him. Finally, in verse 12, Krishna reveals the fruit of such practice. The steadfast yogi attains peace by abandoning attachment to results, while the one driven by desire, attached to the fruits, remains bound. This contrast is timeless. Psychology demonstrates that inner peace comes not from outcomes but from alignment with values. Neuroscience points out that chasing constant rewards overstimulates dopamine, leaving emptiness, while detachment balances the system. Logic clarifies. The traveler who walks without burden reaches the destination with ease, while the one who clings to baggage tires quickly. Krishna now reveals the deeper state of the yogi, one who sees equality in all beings and rests in inner freedom. In verse 13 he says, "The self-controlled person, renouncing all actions mentally, dwells happily in the city of 9 gates, neither acting nor causing action." The city of 9 gates refers to the human body: 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, mouth, anus, and genital. The true self simply dwells within, untouched by the body's activities. Psychology teaches that detachment from bodily identity reduces suffering. Neuroscience confirms that when one identifies less with bodily cravings, the prefrontal cortex strengthens control over impulses. Logic reminds us, the king lives in the palace but does not sweep its floors. He rules from within. In verse 14 to 15, Krishna continues, "The Lord does not create actions, nor attachment to actions, nor the fruits of action. It is nature that acts. The Supreme neither accepts the sins nor the virtues of anyone. Knowledge is veiled by ignorance, and thus beings are deluded." Here, Krishna separates the divine self from worldly entanglement. Actions arise from Prakriti, material nature. The self is only the witness. Psychology recognizes this as the split between ego, which claims I am the doer, and higher awareness, which simply observes. Neuroscience adds, much of our behavior is automatic, driven by brain circuits, while awareness allows us to step back. Logic says, the lamp only gives light. It does not direct the shadows. In verse 16, Krishna promises, when ignorance is destroyed by knowledge of the self, then knowledge shines like the sun, revealing the supreme. Ignorance binds, knowledge frees. Psychology calls this insight, a breakthrough that reorients life. Neuroscience shows that when false beliefs collapse, the brain rewires into healthier patterns. Logic concludes, when the sun rises, no lamp is needed. In verse 17, he explains the qualities of the liberated, those whose mind is absorbed in the self, whose refuge is the self, who strive with firm faith and remove ignorance with knowledge. They go to the state from which there is no return. This is liberation. Psychology would call it self-actualization, the full flowering of human potential. Neuroscience reveals that states of deep meditation alter brain waves into lasting calm and harmony. Logic reminds us, the river that merges into the ocean does not return. Finally, in verse 18, Krishna gives a breathtaking vision. The wise see with equal eye a learned Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and even one who eats dog's flesh. This is the vision of oneness. True wisdom erases all prejudice and sees the self in all forms. Psychology emphasizes that compassion arises when we recognize common humanity. Neuroscience shows empathy lights up shared brain circuits, proving unity at a biological level. Logic affirms, the gold is the same, whether shaped into a crown or a coin. Krishna now speaks of the peace that arises from detachment and the joy of the soul who is free from bondage. In verse 19, he declares, those whose intellect is steady, who are free from delusion, whose self is established in knowledge, who are not entangled by desires. They act without expectation and attain peace. This peace is not from escape, but from balance within action. Psychology shows that inner stability comes when we detach from outcomes and act with clarity. Neuroscience explains that non-attachment calms the stress response system, lowering cortisol and enhancing well-being. Logic teaches, the boat that drops its anchor remains steady, even in strong winds. In verse 20, Krishna says, one who neither rejoices in obtaining the pleasant nor grieves on receiving the unpleasant, who is steady in wisdom and undiluted, such a knower of Brahman is established in Brahman. Here, Krishna defines equanimity, the ability to remain centered in both gain and loss. Psychology calls this emotional resilience. Neuroscience notes that balanced emotional regulation strengthens the prefrontal cortex, reducing reactivity. Logic makes it simple. The mountain does not bow to the storm, nor dance with the breeze. It remains firm. In verse 21, Krishna continues, one who is unattached to external contacts, who finds happiness in the self, whose mind is united with Brahman, attains unending bliss. This bliss is not dependent on the world but arises from within. Psychology affirms that intrinsic well-being is stronger than pleasure-seeking. Neuroscience shows that meditation activates brain regions linked with joy and compassion, independent of external rewards. Logic explains, the lamp that shines from within needs no oil from outside. In verse 22, Krishna highlights the secret of freedom. The pleasures born of contact with the senses are sources of suffering, because they have a beginning and an end. The wise do not delight in them. This is a warning against chasing fleeting pleasures. Psychology confirms that the hedonic treadmill makes external pleasures temporary, leaving emptiness. Neuroscience reveals that constant dopamine chasing dulls the brain's reward system. Logic teaches, drinking salt water only increases thirst. In verse 23 he adds, one who can withstand the urges of desire and anger, even before the body falls, is a yogi, a happy person. This is mastery over the most powerful human drives. Psychology identifies this as self-control, the key to success and fulfillment. Neuroscience confirms that resisting impulses strengthens the neural pathways of discipline. Logic illustrates, the rider who controls the horses enjoys the journey, while the one dragged by them suffers. In verse 24 to 25, Krishna paints the vision of the true yogi, one whose happiness, joy, and light are within, who is united with the self, becomes one with Brahman. Those great souls freed from desire and anger, with minds controlled in knowledge of the self, enter eternal freedom. Psychology calls this self-transcendence. When identity expands beyond ego, neuroscience shows such states are linked with heightened gamma waves, associated with unity and bliss. Logic reminds us, when a drop merges into the ocean, it loses nothing, it becomes infinite. Finally, in verse 26, Krishna describes the compassionate yogi, those who are free from desire, anger, fear, and attachment, who are devoted to the welfare of all beings, attain peace. This is the heart of yoga, not just inner freedom, but universal love. Psychology proves that altruism increases happiness more than selfishness. Neuroscience shows helping others releases oxytocin and endorphins, deepening well-being. Logic concludes, the tree bears fruit not for itself, but for all who take shelter beneath it. Thus, Krishna shows that true freedom comes from equanimity, detachment from fleeting pleasures, mastery of the senses, and devotion to the good of all beings. Krishna now reveals a higher vision of karma yoga, the transformation of every action into an offering. In verse 27, he declares, by restraining the senses, mind, and intellect, the yogi engages in selfless action, dedicating all activities to purification. This shows that action becomes sacred when performed with discipline. Psychology agrees. Habits of restraint and mindfulness free us from impulsive living. Neuroscience shows that self-regulation strengthens neural networks of focus and clarity. Logic explains, water flowing through channels irrigates the field, but scattered water is wasted. In verse 28, Krishna expands this idea. The one who sacrifices the functions of the senses and breath into the fire of self-control is truly a yogi. Here sacrifice is not ritual, but inner transformation. Psychology calls this sublimation, redirecting energy from lower impulses into higher purposes. Neuroscience notes that when desires are consciously transformed, the brain rewires itself toward long-term fulfillment. Logic makes it clear, the same fire that burns wood can cook food, depending on how it is directed. In verse 29, Krishna brings the vision together. Those who know Brahman sacrifice actions into Brahman, abandoning attachment, they merge into the eternal. This is the state where every act, breathing, eating, working, speaking, is seen as an offering to the divine. Psychology affirms that purpose-driven people find meaning even in ordinary tasks. Neuroscience shows that when we connect actions to a higher ideal, dopamine rewards are steady and sustainable. Logic concludes, when every drop flows into the ocean, nothing is wasted. Krishna teaches here that the highest yogi is not one who escapes action, but one who transforms every action into worship, turning life itself into a sacred ritual. Krishna now turns to the essence of surrender, the secret that transforms duty into liberation. In verse 30 he commands, dedicate all your actions to me, with your mind centered on the self, free from desire, free from ego, and free from lethargy. Rise and fight. This is the highest form of karma yoga, not acting for results, but as an offering to the divine. Psychology shows that when actions are linked to higher purpose, motivation becomes limitless. Neuroscience explains that purpose-driven behavior activates the brain's reward system more sustainably than chasing temporary pleasure. Logic states, the soldier who fights for truth is stronger than the one who fights only for pay. In verse 31, Krishna promises, those who follow this teaching faithfully, without envy or doubt, are also liberated from the bondage of karma. This shows that freedom is not limited to sages. Anyone who accepts this path sincerely is uplifted. Psychology recognizes that belief in guiding principles creates resilience. Neuroscience confirms that conviction reshapes brain patterns, reducing doubt and anxiety. Logic clarifies, the compass that always points north brings safety to every traveler, whether novice or expert. In verse 32, Krishna warns, but those who out of ignorance reject this teaching and criticize it, they are deluded, lost, and destroyed by their own confusion. Here is the consequence of arrogance. Denying truth leads to suffering. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance. Resisting wisdom blinds the mind. Neuroscience shows that constant negativity strengthens pathways of stress and fear. Logic makes it clear. Closing one's eyes to the sun does not bring darkness to the world, only to oneself. With these verses, Krishna shows that surrendering action to the divine is the key to freedom, while rejecting truth traps one in misery. Krishna now explains why understanding one's nature is essential for true freedom. In verse 33 he says, "Even the wise act according to their own nature. Beings follow their tendencies. What can repression achieve?" This highlights that dharma must align with one's innate nature. Psychology supports this. Forcing oneself into roles against inner temperament creates frustration and imbalance. Neuroscience shows that personality traits are rooted in neural wiring. Growth comes not by repression, but by refinement. Logic makes it clear. A river must flow according to its course. Blocking it only causes floods. In verse 34, Krishna warns, "Every sense has attraction and aversion toward its objects. Do not fall under their sway, for they are obstacles on the path." This verse teaches that desires are natural, but attachment is dangerous. Psychology observes that unchecked cravings enslave the mind, while discipline brings clarity. Neuroscience confirms that the brain's reward system can be hijacked by repeated indulgence, creating addiction. Logic illustrates, fire can cook food or burn the house. It depends on whether it is controlled. In verse 35, Krishna gives one of the most profound instructions of the Gita. Better is one's own duty, even if imperfect, than the duty of another, well performed. Death in one's own dharma is better. The duty of another is fraught with fear. Here lies the secret of authentic living. Psychology teaches that fulfillment comes from pursuing one's personal calling, not imitation. Neuroscience shows that acting in alignment with intrinsic motivation strengthens resilience and well-being. Logic concludes, a tree grows strong in its own soil, but withers if transplanted into foreign ground. Thus, Krishna reminds Arjuna that dharma is personal. True freedom is not found in imitation, but in living one's own truth with courage. Arjuna, puzzled and deeply curious, now raises one of the most timeless questions. In verse 36, he asks Krishna, what is it that drives a person to commit sin, even against their own will, as if forced by some unseen power? This question touches the very heart of human weakness. Why do people act against their better judgment, knowing what is right but still choosing what is wrong? Krishna answers in verse 37, it is desire, it is anger. Born of the mode of passion, it is all-consuming and greatly sinful. Know this to be the enemy here on earth. Here, Krishna identifies uncontrolled desire, kama, as the root cause. When frustrated, desire turns into anger, clouding judgment and forcing one into destructive behavior. Psychology calls this impulse control failure, where emotions override reason. Neuroscience explains that when the brain's reward system dopamine pathways overpowers the prefrontal cortex, people act compulsively. Logic proves it. The rider who loses control of his horse is dragged where the horse runs, not where he wishes to go. In verse 38, Krishna compares desire to smoke covering fire, dust covering a mirror, or the womb covering an embryo, always hiding the truth within. Psychology agrees. Desires distort perception, making people blind to reality. Neuroscience confirms that cravings, bias, decision-making, masking long-term consequences. Logic makes it simple. A fog may hide the sun, but the sun itself is never gone. Only our vision is blocked. In verse 39, he adds, desire is the eternal enemy of the wise. Like fire, it can never be satisfied, and it burns everything in its path. This is the endless cycle of craving. Psychology notes the hedonic treadmill. No matter what one achieves, the mind soon desires more. Neuroscience shows that dopamine spikes never bring lasting fulfillment, only a push for the next high. Logic concludes, feeding fire with fuel never extinguishes it, it only grows stronger. Krishna's words reveal that the real enemy is not outside, but within, uncontrolled desire and anger. To conquer them is to conquer the battlefield of life itself.